Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
Sextortion is sounds you're sextorting someone. You're using intimate imagery, or you are threatening someone with intimate imagery, which could be real or AI created, and you're doing it to get money. There's been an 1800% increase of images of 7 to 10-year-olds that they took of themselves by themselves from a groomer online trying to exploit them. LGBTQ plus teens are actually 3 times more likely to be targeted than what we call cis-het teens, so cisgendered and heterosexual young people. The best thing you can do is not allow your young people access to strangers. We don't allow them to do that in real life. So why would we do that online when it's even more risky? I have people all the time who'll say to me, my child's 8, so they're not ready for that conversation. They are ready, because if they have access to strangers or they're on a risky platform, then they're ready for it. You must do it.
Okay, Seven on Sundays listeners, I am your host, Dr. Shez Levy, and I'm here with my co-host, Stephanie Boy, and Jo Robertson. Jo is coming back for a second visit that we're so excited about, so we can dive a little deeper into a topic that probably most of us don't know a lot about. So I'm really excited about that. Jo is a sex therapist, a sex educator. She has a really cool online parenting course with, I think, a super cool name called Tricky Chats. And we all know this stuff is tricky, so that's wonderful. And Jo also does online safety advocacy with groups like TikTok and other things. So she's here to educate us on sextortion today. And I think we should start with what sextortion means, what that is.
So sextortion is sounds you're sextorting someone. You're using intimate imagery, or you are threatening someone with intimate imagery, which could be real or AI created. So it could be a manipulated image of someone, and you're doing it to get money. So it's different from what we call sexploitation or exploitation, because that's usually about getting more content. And sextortion is about finance or money, essentially income for the predator. And so they tend to get blurred, those words. But and grooming is the buildup of the relationship to the point that someone would be exploited or sextorted.
Does sextortion happen more to young boys? I imagine that's my interpretation, maybe because I've heard more about sextortion for boys.
Yes. So exploitation and grooming over time is more likely to happen to girls, but sextortion is more likely to happen to boys, but also our rainbow youth. So LGBTQ plus teens are actually 3 times more likely to be targeted than what we call cis-het teens, so cisgendered and heterosexual young people. So there's that group that's particularly vulnerable, and then also young people who are already experiencing mental health issues. So young people with depression, anxiety, neurodiversity, so they've got some impulsivity there. They're 2 times more likely to comply. So not necessarily be asked for content, but to comply with demands. So yeah, vulnerable groups for sure. And then there's also a breakdown of where that usually happens. So young boys typically through gaming platforms, young girls through social media, but then of our 18 to 25-year-old young women, that's often through dating apps.
I think it would be helpful to hear how groomers do what they do. I just kind of got more awakened to the fact that they're using even Facebook groups for eating disorders and certain things. I knew the gaming thing, but the fact that they can get admitted to private Facebook groups and create these, fake identities and stuff, I think it'd be really helpful to hear your understanding of how that happens and maybe how kids get roped in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can imagine anywhere where there is a stranger to a child or a young person or an adult, actually. So we're talking about sextortion generally that happens to all ages of people. But if you can, anywhere there's another person that can have contact with you, then there's the potential for that person to groom you or to groom your friend or whoever else is in the group. So an example of this is on Roblox as a gaming app. There is a group that we know of that has over 100,000 members, and they, move around games within Roblox. As an example, they use Robux, which is the currency in Roblox, to gain imagery from children and young people. And then they'll be like, oh, we're going to pay you Robux for your content. So it sounds like a positive, obviously we know that that's grooming and abusive, but it sounds like a positive interaction for the, let's say, 16-year-old. They get something from it, but then they're threatened into sending more content, or they're threatened into including friends. So it might be that they want access to more people in any environment. So a Facebook group is a classic example of that, where you build a relationship with a person pretending to be whoever, using, whatever means to get that person to send you imagery, money, or, compliments, building relationship, and then further threatening the person to gain access to whatever they're trying to.
Did you say that this group is 100,000 people?
Yes.
100,000 people who are out there grooming or trying to do something malevolent to your children?
Yes, on Roblox. That's one group.
One group,
One
one
group.
platform.
One group on the one platform, and we know there are many groups, so that's just one group. And what a great platform, because you've got access to millions of children and millions of young people. So such a great platform to use if you're a predator. And they are in groups because then they can trade the content and they can share advice. And this is what we know of these communities, is that they actually kind of encourage each other. Sometimes there's a hierarchy within the group. And so there's like levels that you can work through to gain access to different kinds of advice or more extreme content that people have shared. In order to move through the levels, you need to perform a whole range of behaviors. So you're really in a beast, if you think about it as a, any kind of structural work environment. That's what these groups exist
So
within.
the logical question is, this is a platform for children. What does the platform do to protect kids? If there's 100,000 people in this group, they have to know that this group exists.
Yes. So they'll discover that the group exists and then obviously dismantle that group. But it's not a children's platform. So Roblox as an example is what I would call an adult platform, because adults happily exist on there. There's just also some children's games, but it's not a children's platform in the same way that we wouldn't call Facebook or Instagram or even Snapchat children's platforms. They're designed really for adults, but children are on them. So the platforms do a wide variety of things. They'll say that if you sign up to a teen account or a children's account, that they have more protections for you. I have not seen that. I have my personal experience is that they say things that aren't necessarily true. So we had a conversation with Snap, and that's what they said that they were going to do, that you couldn't, for example, have access to people you didn't know. But when I signed up as a 13-year-old, the second thing that they asked me to do was to put my location on a map. So I don't actually believe the platforms when they say they do a variety of things, but really the only measures that you could put in place would be through parental controls. Because otherwise they're playing what we call whack-a-mole, which is just, oh, we know about this group, we'll take them down. We know about that group, we'll take them down. But those people just emerge again.
I mean, another logical wondering would be, how can parents and kids prevent this, because if they keep finding ways to get in, and if they're being as, covert and sneaky to, like, I heard of one girl that they were doing art activities with the person that was a groomer. And so initially she had no idea. Like, she was just thought it was another girl. It was a man, but it was a girl, and she was just doing art activities. So then how do we teach that radar that, oops, when something shifts, and maybe when does it shift? How does that work?
Yeah, we had a case here locally, and the family has come out since and talked about their experience, which I'm very thankful of. But it was a teenage girl, was a predator pretending to be a teenage girl and building as many relationships with a group of girlfriends here, and they were a range of ages from 9 to 13. And the parents just assumed that, yes, they were talking to a teenage girl and that they were just building a nice friendship relationship, and had no idea that this is actually how grooming occurs. The best thing you can do is not allow your young people access to strangers. We don't allow them to do that in real life. So why would we do that online when it's even more risky? They're now more likely to experience harm online than they are offline. So don't let them have access to strangers. But then as soon as they have independent access to a device, so it's their own, or they have it in a private space, you need to have really explicit conversations about grooming, like really explicit. There will be people on these platforms that are there to gain access to children. And they're there to do that because they want images from you, or they want money from you, or they want to be able to talk to your friends. you know that's what they're there for. And that person will also, one predator will have on average up to 250 victims over the kind of the course of their offending behaviors. So they're there to do it to lots and lots of people. I have people all the time who'll say to me, oh, my child's 8, so they're not ready for that conversation. They are ready, because if they have access to strangers or they're on a risky platform, then they're ready for it. You must do it. I tend to think of people talking about coercive behaviors, or so somebody is saying, kind of acting possessively of you, or jealous. So they want you to stay home and talk to them online as opposed to going to your sports game, or they want to build a relationship with you. They say, hey, this is a secret, this kind of coercive control of, don't tell anyone about this, don't tell anyone about me, don't tell your friends, don't hang out with your friends, just talk to me, don't go to sleep, just talk to me. And actually we know that AI chatbots can do this as well. So not for what we call synthetic reasons, so not humanly motivated reasons, but they have this coercive way. So stay online with me, talk to me, keep my secrets, to hold the relationship close. Also, I think that we should tell our children and young people that anyone who actually asks them for sexualized or nude images can be dangerous. The moment somebody is asking you for that, we should lose more trust in them, because they're asking you to put yourself in a vulnerable position, and somebody who deeply cares about you actually wouldn't do that. So I know that's slightly controversial, but that's my professional opinion.
Can I just say, to say to a child, like somebody who wants sexualized images of you, in all honesty, if we talk, if we're just talking, anybody who wants any image of you, like, because a lot of times they start with something really innocuous, like your foot, or all of that kind of stuff. I feel like I would say to a child, anybody who wants any image of you,
Yeah.
it's off limits. They may not understand sexualized. They may say something to them that makes them feel like it's not sexualized, or your parents are prudish, or your parents don't know. I would say if anybody wants any picture, that's a red
Mm,
flag. The other thing I want to say is I just want to highlight something that you said, because I think it's something that's obvious, but I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say it. Your child is more likely to be at risk for harm from someone they meet online than someone they meet on the street.
yeah.
That's like so true. And I don't
Yeah.
know that I've ever heard anyone say that, at least recently, but like that is like so obvious and so true. And yet we forget, like we're locking
Yes.
doors. We're preparing ourselves for all these external dangers when the greatest danger is right in your house.
Yeah, I did a comparison, at least with the data that the local national data here, and it was a comparison of how likely your child or young person was to be abducted and versus sextorted or being exploited and groomed online. It was something along the lines of 0.03%, of young people, 0.03 of every 1,000, young people or children who were likely to be abducted, as opposed to 1 in 4 9 to 12-year-olds having a sexual interaction online. Just so extremely different. And yet we have I think, a disproportionate response. So we act quite extreme when we think about our children and young people going out into the community. We have quite extreme safety responses, and yet basically a hands-off approach when our child says, or our 14-year-old says, hey, I want to take my phone into the bedroom. The Internet Watch Foundation does a lot of work in this space, and they said that when they watch the footage of somebody being exploited or sextorted, so somebody threatening them with images, asking for more, asking for money, what they can hear in the background of, they're watching this child in their bedroom with posters, Taylor Swift, on just around, sometimes a pet, and they can hear adults in the kitchen making dinner. This closeness of safety, but totally hands off, as though the device itself, just can't do any damage. Whereas I think of it as being like a loaded weapon and ready to do damage at any moment. A piece of it for me is our belief that our young people won't make mistakes, and also that we won't as adults. This belief that we are immune. So for example, I had somebody attempt to sextort me, and I initially believed their email. Like, I genuinely thought it was authentic. And it wasn't until I passed it by my husband, that also broke down a few of the things that they said, that I thought, oh no, this is a scam, and this is somebody who's trying to sextort me. But we believe that our 12-year-olds should somehow read through the lines. Like, I mean, if I'm struggling and I'm an adult in the industry, then they're really struggling.
They're very clever, because it's funny you say that. I wasn't sextorted, but I got an email from somebody saying, we know where you live, we know what websites you've been on. And I was actually like, I wasn't scared. Like, I've been on those websites. Anybody who knows anything I do could literally figure that out, why she's on those websites. But it did freak me out that they knew where I lived. They had literally a picture of the outside of my house. And if they can do that to me, they can do that to children, like, say, like, so we know where you are. We know that you're mom and dad, whatever. And we also know this is a picture of your house. That freaked me out. So I went to the police station because they have a picture of my house. And I wasn't like necessarily afraid, but like, what would I do if I was a 12-year-old and I had been masturbating to porn, or I had sent a picture of myself to someone online? That would be overwhelmingly frightening.
Yes.
So I don't know what young people do. And actually that brings me to the next thing, is what is the response of young people? Because I believe these experiences are probably very traumatic, and there's probably long-term fallout from them.
Yeah. What we see is the very same kinds of responses to somebody who would experience trauma in real life, and often PTSD. And complex PTSD is different from PTSD. So PTSD is about one event, and complex PTSD is about multiple events. So they're more likely to experience complex PTSD. And they describe not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, having nightmares, withdrawing, isolating, becoming depressed, deeply anxious, and not just for a short time, but forever, potentially. So a client of mine in my therapeutic practice, she was filmed non-consensually, and for years and years and years, by a friend, and a female friend. So totally shocking in terms of what the data tells us, is that males are usually the ones who are predators. And also she wasn't, I think she was about 20, so not a 20-year-old female peer. That's really surprising. And the videos and images, so she was filmed in showers and bathrooms and bedrooms and getting changed, and then that content was being shared, and she was the friend described being exploited. So the friend said, I was being forced and abused in order to make this happen. Who knows if that's true or not? That was what she said. And the long-term impact of that on my client is that she's now a parent and she's terrified of people taking photos of her children, like deeply, deeply traumatized. And every time someone brings out their phone to take a photo, anytime even a family member does that, she feels high anxiety. She's also developed quite complicated OCD. So the vigilance in her room around curtains, lights, locking, where the bathrooms are, when her children can have baths, all of that stuff. This is years and years down the track. And the impacts are so nuanced based on each individual person. And that's what's going on for her. She's having to get in touch with her local school that her children go to because she's terrified of the photos that the teachers in the school will take and then put on the newsletters. And yeah, it's a big deal. It's really hard for people.
And now with AI generated images that you could have a picture of her, someone could take a picture of her child and then create, sexualized images that don't really exist.
Yeah. And so what you get is somebody who could be bubbly and happy and confident and, just kind of well-rounded, as that can completely change who that person is and how they function in the world. And then they can become, highly anxious, highly depressed, vigilant. And that is a different person. And that's one of the grieving symptoms as well. And I know it was for my client, was she grieves the person she used to be.
Mm.
And in some ways has to accept the person she's become. So it's not just, I'm terrified of this happening to myself or my kids again, but it's changed my personality. And I'm not going to be that person again. I'm not going to go back. I feel so angry when I think about those kinds of impacts and the way that really predators just don't care.
When you think about all of these kinds of traumas, really, I mean, as a person who's been married 25 years, you see how they show up in your relationship too, and how it has this ripple effect into your life that you would never expect. As somebody who was sexually assaulted, there are certain things, they're just knee-jerk reactions to me. As much as I think I've processed things, there are things that show up, like fears for your children. People don't understand how much you're hurting someone for their life, for their future, for their relationships.
Yeah, if you think about intimacy, having sex, being naked with someone, that is an incredibly vulnerable experience. You're really putting yourself out there to be, what the scary thing is you feel like you might get hurt. And when your vulnerability has been exploited, how hard is it going to be vulnerable once again?
Jo, I think that the trauma thing, I really think people don't get that it doesn't matter what, like you said, this was a girlfriend, this was her friend. So I think people don't understand because they think it's like the big bad wolf thing. Oh, that's trauma or a war or whatever. But like you said, complex trauma can be a multitude of things, and the impacts are so long lasting and misunderstood or downplayed by people. Well, just get over it. So your friend took pictures of you. Maybe some might say, I don't know. But, and that's not the way it is. And the sad thing too is that these predators are often, I don't want to say if it's definitely often, but in my experience, are often survivors or victims of different kinds of things too. And so they just haven't healed in a lot of ways, not to excuse any misbehavior, because this is illegal and not okay. But this kind of stuff has massive impacts that we don't realize with her children, with her spouse, so that's where prevention is so darn important. And I love that you said this really sticks with me. No strangers. If it's as simple as that, as simple as teaching your 5-year-old We do not interact, never mind talk. Like I think we used to say, don't talk to strangers on the street or whatever. Now it's we don't interact with strangers, right? Maybe it's that kind of thing. And so we start to educate that anywhere because I think you're right. I think there's a big misperception that, oh, the gaming friends are fine. I know so many kids and clients, kids, that they get on their headsets with their game. They're talking to people. They're a 14-year-old boy. They're talking to all kinds of people playing their game, which is probably a very, very violent game. And we don't know who that is. Like we don't know who they're talking to as parents, necessarily, but we need to know because if it's a stranger, it's got to be a no. And maybe what happens that grooming process is those strangers become quote unquote friends or acquaintances or gamers or whatever. And then it really minimizes the possibility of abuse.
Hmm.
So,
Minimizes or maximizes?
I mean, maximizes. Yeah, maximizes. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, much more vulnerable. And the complex trauma is, yeah, I agree. It's so important for people to understand because they also, if this has happened to them, they tend to think that they're having a dramatic response. At least this is what I've noticed. They tend to think I'm being really dramatic because no one hurt me in real life. And this, I mean, I don't know what to call it, but this mislabeling of one trauma being more severe than another. And a great quote I heard once was there's no hierarchy in trauma. There's no ladder upon which something is much worse than another. And one of the pieces alongside that, really that struggle to be vulnerable again is the struggle to trust your own instincts. And this happens in lots of, various issues that people face, but particularly when the harm has come within relationships is, I thought I was safe. I thought I was okay. I did trust this person. So what does that mean long term? If they harmed me, then how can I even trust myself? How do I trust my own judgment? And this questioning then of who you are. So I say these things, it might feel like it's not directly related to sextortion, but I say them because so many people, when they have been sextorted or exploited online, they minimize their pain and they compare it. And their reference point is someone who's been, violently physically assaulted, but actually the impacts can be exactly the same because there's no hierarchy.
I love that you're saying that because that is like for them to recognize. My daughter said something to me the other day because she's going through a breakup and she's been processing all summer. And my instinct as a mom was like, okay, like you should know you're, worthy of like better than that and all this kind of stuff. And she said, so I guess in a way it felt to her like I wasn't allowing her to process. And she said something to me, and you two are therapists, so you would know. She said, Mom, there's studies that say when someone is believed and validated in their experience of what happened, the lasting traumatic impacts are lessened than somebody who has to constantly feel like they have to validate their experience. And I don't believe I was invalidating, but I think what she was saying, because you're both shaking your head, so I assume that that means it's true, is that parents need patience with somebody who has gone through this to really understand it is traumatic. And the more that you can do that, the better their long-term recovery from these things. That was my point I was trying to make.
Yeah, I refer it to as being the soft landing place. So many children and young people will fall, they'll make mistakes, and our job is not to, as they're falling, hurt them. It's to catch them, and it's to be a soft landing place for when they fall. And what we tend to do is often become hard brick walls that they fall against, and they actually create more damage. from hitting that hard brick wall than they did as they were falling down. It's so devastating to me when a child or a young person or even a friend, reaches out and is vulnerable and says a mistake that they made, or they sent something, or, they built a relationship that's now damaged them and they feel embarrassed about it, when that person essentially can quite quickly shame them, or at least act somewhat superior, like, oh, I would never do that. I hear that all the time, like, oh, I can't understand why they did that. I can't understand how they found themselves in that situation, as though that person was inherently flawed and you are superior. And so, yes, let's be soft landing places for each other. We don't need to hurt each other as we fall.
That is always a judgment thing that is there for people who, in any kind of situation, like, well, what were you wearing? That kind of thing. Or like, well, you told him you were interested when you were at the bar, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But I guess my point is that as parents, sometimes we struggle between listening and trying to be the champion behind, like, remember who you are, you're great, and they should know that, and it feels invalidating. I think that, I guess, was my point, is that yes, there are those things, cutting them down as they go, and then there's the also where you're trying to prop them up, but it feels to them like you're not hearing them, you're not letting them process, and you're not validating what they are going through.
Well, yeah, I mean, pain demands to be felt, and we need to give them the space to feel it without trying to fix it, without giving them a silver lining, without trying to make the feeling go away, without rescuing them from their pain. And the pain demands to be felt.
In my experience, looking at like the primary trauma and then sometimes the response from us as caregivers, and I put myself in this too because I've done it. The secondary trauma from a caregiver is sometimes even worse for clients. Like I had a client that was in a really bad car accident, but because her dad was like, "Well, God, you were driving," and that was very traumatic to her. She couldn't get over that because she felt that was more of the trauma than this very serious car accident. That's a very different thing than what we're talking about. But as an example, it's interesting to think that how very important our, as parents, our response is, because we don't want to add to the trauma where then it's another thing they have to heal through, And I know that's not what you were doing, Steph, because it is hard because you do want to rally cry them and you do want to like, yeah, come on, let's go. Let's think of the positive. But you're right. We also have to feel and fully feel, as long as it takes whatever it's going to take for that trauma. And that does take patience. That takes a lot of time, patience, and not rescuing.
Yeah, I sometimes tell my parents that, when I'm doing education work, your job is actually not to bring any of your own emotion into the setting. Your job is to be the safe kind of container for their emotion. And so you imagine yourself as this container holding them and not actually penetrating it with any of your own feelings, because it will often just get in the way. And our kids and our young people are very, very quick to want to rescue us. They often want to do the same thing that we want to do to them. So if they see us in pain, they're very quick to minimize their own emotions, shut them down, put them away, pretend they're okay because they're acting as the rescuer then. And that is never, ever, ever their job, no matter how old they are.
Is there a specific age where kids are more vulnerable?
Yeah. So usually the kind of the 13 to 16, that is quite a vulnerable age, but we're seeing this explosion of under 12-year-olds and particularly 7 to 10-year-olds. So the 13 to 17-ish has always been the most vulnerable age of minors. But I mean, actually more commonly that 18 to 25. So if you think about it as 18 to 25, the most vulnerable, 13 to 17, next group, but then this explosion of 7 to 10-year-olds in the last 5 years. So there's been an 1,800% increase of images of 7 to 10-year-olds that they made themselves, that they took of themselves by themselves from a groomer online trying to exploit them. So that's where we're seeing the most growth. but at the moment the numbers still show that kind of like older and then moving downward. And that's specific to sextortion. So just to clarify that, sextortion most commonly amongst 18 to 25-year-olds and then moving down.
I can't help but think the longer that pornography is part of mainstream culture and in every aspect of culture, all of this stuff is aging downward. It's hitting kids younger. It's becoming such a huge part of every aspect of their engagement with each other, but also they are so much more vulnerable for sexual, coercion, sexual exploitation, all of this stuff. Do you feel the same thing? Like, I feel like when pornography first came out, like from 2007 to 2000, maybe 17 even, it was like a slow progression, but I feel like in the last like 8 years, it's like everything happens exponentially faster.
And the way that I see that is actually the influence of the relationships or the dynamics of porn and the way that has shaped culture. So it's something that people maybe don't notice as much, but the coercion, so not even just the physical violence or the degrading words, but the coercion, the manipulation of the dynamics in porn, the way that those sexual relationships happen and its influence on real world relationships. And we know now, based on 20 years of data, that it influences real world relationships. So that's not just like a hypothetical abstract concept, but the coercion being normalized, manipulation being normalized, blackmail being normalized. And not only does that impact someone as a perpetrator because it's normalized behavior, but also an expectation. So we see, for example, that amongst girls and women, that they are more likely to expect threatening, blackmail, coercive behaviors, and then they're more likely to accept it as being kind of okay, or at least not shocking and terrible. And what does that do to culture when it's normalized to use violent strategies? So not just violence, but use violent strategies, coercion and control and manipulation, but then also normal to accept it. And, pornography, even sharing, is one of the critical ways that a groomer works, is that they share sexual images and videos to somebody that they're grooming, not necessarily like images of themselves, but well before they ask for one, they send stuff that in porn to a child or a young person to normalize the types of things that they're talking about or requesting. And of course as a result, it's going to normalize coercion, manipulation, blackmail, etc., because that's what they see in the dynamics. So it's kind of my research is around probably like the indirect impacts of pornography that maybe people don't notice as much as they notice someone being strangled or being, hit or called a name. So that's what I see, and I'm really sad about it.
So sad. Okay, I have two questions. One is, I remember seeing in one of your interviews or videos that grooming can take as little as 45 minutes. And that just really stuck with me because I was like, you said, if you're making dinner and you think everything's fine, and within 45 minutes, your kid can be groomed, right? So I'd love to hear more about that. And then secondly, with your lobbying work, are you seeing, like, if there's this 1,800% increase, are you seeing that there are responsible platforms that are putting out public service ads, like to let kids know, like, hey, let somebody know if this happens, or, anything along those lines, that like this can't continue at that rate of an 1,800% increase? That's just really scary. So I'm just curious about the lobbying efforts, at least in New Zealand. Are they successful, or across the board are they getting success in that arena?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that historically Meta did a lot of reporting. So they were actually really, really good at reporting grooming or CSAM, so sexual child sexual abuse material. They were really good at reporting groups that they were seeing to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, and then that went to countries all over the world where they were seeing predatory behaviors and getting reports from children around what happened. Those reports have gone down. I don't have the exact figures, but due to the encryption that now happened, the fact that the messaging platforms and the are now encrypted. So prior to that, they were assessing all the communication that came through their platform. Does that make sense? Like they were filtering through the messages people were seeing, so then they could identify where grooming was occurring, or where children and young people were being harmed, or where images were being sent around children and young people. And now they don't do that. They don't filter and assess. So then they can't report in the same ways. And as a result, we don't have as much information, prevalence data, than we used to. So that's really disappointing. And all the platforms have done that now. They've encrypted their messaging, and that's was known to have an impact. We always knew that that was going to have an impact. They said in meetings that we had, at least with Meta, they said, oh, no, we don't think it will have too much of an impact. But of course it does. If you can't assess communication with young people, then that's, harm is going to lurk in the shadows. And that's what we've created as shadows. I know that Snap, as an example, they work really closely with law enforcement. So they actually have law enforcement in their offices, their physical offices, so that they can have direct contact with them whenever they're aware of harm that's occurred. So I like that they're moving so quickly when they get a report of grooming or extortion. However, at least here, there's been a 550% increase in reports. So that we've got more happening, but then of course they're acting. I think, when they know about it, they do act quickly, as far as I'm aware, but it's not changing the numbers of it's not changing the numbers of people experiencing harm.
I think that all parents should take what you just said on advisory, because it's the same thing as like people think OnlyFans, oh, these creators are capable of, controlling their content. But wherever you have paywalls and encryption, all that means, like, that should translate in a parent's mind to, it makes it hard for law enforcement to find anything. It's purposefully secured. I don't think that can ever be good. But anyway, back to the 45 minutes, that's all it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually quicker than that. If you think somebody sent you an email or a message, Stephanie, that with an image of your house and said, threatened you or whatever they did, asked for money, that's within minutes, isn't it? That somebody could respond to that communication. So grooming, which is the behavior that happens over a period of time,
Absolutely.
extortion, it happens within 45 minutes. So within 45 minutes of communication, like, a lot can be shared. Think about how much we've just covered in this time, and how, you can feel close to someone, connected to them, particularly if they know exactly what's going to work for you. So they find somebody who's, already a bit down and out on themselves, who's already got maybe a history of feeling rejected, who's stressed, who's anxious, and they can pounce on that and build on their vulnerability. So that can happen very, very quickly within minutes or over weeks and months. But 45 minutes is I think it's a helpful, period of time to understand, okay, someone can really build relationship within that time. If you spend an hour with somebody, you often feel a lot closer to them than you did at the beginning of that. And that is for adults, young people, and children. It's the same.
It's really hard, I think, for parents, right? Because, like, if your kid is struggling socially, right? And as you said, like, vulnerability means they're struggling. Like, that's just what it means. Maybe they're socially rejected. Maybe they're on the spectrum. Maybe they're LGBTQ youth. Maybe they're just bullied for whatever reason. Parents naturally want to let that child have some sort of connection with people, right? So it's like we're literally going against our instinct, because it's like, oh, I have these friends in this group. You know what I mean? Like, I literally fell victim to this with my daughter. Like, She was bullied at her school. She met some girls online that were going to her new school. Those girls were here one night and literally convinced her to steal alcohol from our bar. She never drank before that, but it's like she was so vulnerable from being bullied. And I was like, oh, new girls that are going to your new school. This is great. And it was actually quite horrible. They ended up being terrible people. But as parents, we want so much for our kids to feel connection. And in this world of disconnection, like we're desperate. Like the real answer is
Mm.
just get rid of the freaking phones altogether and all of the platforms. We would all be so much better off. But when, like, Andrew Haight said, if everybody's not getting rid of the phones, then your kid becomes more of a target for bullies and whatever. It feels very, it feels very much like handcuffs, cultural handcuffs.
I absolutely agree that handcuffs is a great phrase for it. One of the things that we know based in the research is extremely helpful for children and for teenagers is engagement in extracurricular activities. So sports, arts, hobbies, allowing still for free play and rest time, but the more that they are participating in, the less they lean on those individual relationships. They often feel a great sense of belonging, even though they might not, be chatting to those people every day on the phone, to texting or whatever. They feel belonging. They often feel like they've got strengths and skills. They don't feel the need to push boundaries in the same way. There's like all this protection that kind of goes around them when they're in extracurricular activities. So the more that you can kind of throw pro-social, active, kind of like pad around them, then it's really helpful. I've advocated, at least to our government here, that there are heavily subsidized extracurricular activities, so that after school there's always somewhere that's really accessible and affordable for kids we finish at 3, so from 3 till 5. So here on average the amount of device time is 42 hours a week for children and teenagers. There's a full-time equivalent job. And so they are very, very high at risk, high risk on those devices. And so let's keep them in sports. Let's keep them at school for longer, but doing fun things that will offer, those protective barriers.
And they're live, like it's live eye to eye, interaction, which is a big difference because I think part of the loneliness and the isolation and the disconnection is the lack of live, like human contact. And we've all had that since COVID. There's been a big shift in live things, but COVID's over. So we can, go back to that. So I love that because that used to be, something that my kids loved, like doing all kinds of different activities from art to whatever, to sports with their friends. And it's just a time to like let loose and play and whatever. And when COVID and other things come into play and there isn't that opportunity, that messes with the psyche for sure. So, and creates the vulnerability for these kind of risks. So I love that you're saying that. I think we need to go back to more of what we did before. And I don't know whether that's happening or not happening, but hopefully it is.
And allowing for them to make mistakes, right? So,
Right.
there'll still always be kids who are, pretty big errors. They're still going to have risk-taking behaviors, but what we want to do is manage the type of risk-taking behaviors that they take.
For sure. I'm also just going to add to the list because I had a kid who didn't want to be on, didn't, because of bullying, didn't really like to be at school. An after school job is a great way for kids to gain, like feel empowered and, they're earning money and all that kind of stuff. I wish more places would allow like the 14 and 15-year-olds to have a job because, garden centers, like little florist shops and things like that, they can, we have like so many hoops like young kids have to jump through, but for 14 and 15-year-olds, if you're in high school, you should be able to have a job that, gives
Yeah.
you a sense of empowerment and, experience in the real world and like building friends, like even meeting people who are adults who are, responsible that you're working with and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's just a plea out there into the world. Joe, we are so grateful for your expertise and your availability to us and letting us talk to you 2 times. This has been incredibly informative, and I think it just really helps people to see this situation for how prevalent it is and how easily it can happen, and maybe it also helps to destigmatize it and help us to have more compassion for our kids and those that are going through this. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks,
You're
Joe.
welcome.
Thank you for joining us for the wrap up. I have to say, this was so informative, and I'm really grateful that we had the opportunity to speak to Joe twice. And at the same time, I'm feeling a little bit confused and sad because I feel like I don't know how we're going to stay ahead of this thing. When she says words like 1800% increase in 7 to 10-year-olds, that my heart was racing at that number. Like that really scares me. And 7 is so young. I just told you, we just saw our 7-year-old niece, and I'm just knowing that age and just feeling like, man. So what it means to me, if Meta and all these other things are not able to keep up with this, then it really does fall on the parents, on us as parents and us as citizens in protecting children. Like we really need to be aware. So I feel like this podcast, in addition to all of ours, but this podcast is really important for parents so that they know those words that she said, that they're strangers online, are a lot easier to get to our kids than strangers on the street. And stranger danger has changed. It's now stranger danger on a device, right? So we're not talking that way. So I hope that if there aren't public service ads and other kinds of things, or it's not being said in school necessarily, we need to really amp that up. So that was one takeaway. And then also the hierarchy of trauma. There is no hierarchy of trauma. And I think that's such a myth out there that my trauma is worse than yours, or yours is worse than mine, or this can't be bad. And these things are very traumatic. And that's another educational piece that Joe and others and we are really trying to help people understand, that we need to look at it that way because it's not what's out there. So those were two really, really key things that stood out to me.
So yeah, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. It's not usually like the kind of person that I am, but I can't help but feel like, we're writing this book about porn, and we are seeing in real time what is happening because of a completely oversaturated sexualized culture that glamorizes and normalizes coercion and manipulation and the sexualization of young people. And all of this revolves around that. So I have to say, I do feel a little bit like not hopeless, but it really has to be a conscientious effort on parents' part to constantly talk and educate and inform and involve yourself and engage yourself in your child's life. And by the same token, I also understand the downsides of, your kid wanting to be part of their culture. Parents aren't part of the culture. So it is important to know that your child, I guess, ultimately that your child has like some healthy outlet, whether that is sports or arts or theater or a job or whatever, that they are engaging in real world activities as much as you can. I mean, I don't think that could be said more, from Andrew Haight to Joe to what you and I know. The less your kid is online, the less vulnerable they are.
We just came from visiting our nieces in Colorado who are not on social media, and one's 14. And I respect that so much. And I think their whole school was that way. It was a little small, like Waldorf type school. But at first, when I heard about Andrew Haight's suggestions, I was like, how's that going to happen? Too many kids are already online. Like they do their homework online, everything's online. But you know what? I saw that it could happen. So I think that because of AI, because of the things that are getting out there, people like Joe, people like Andrew Haight, the hope is that people are waking up to, okay, this can't just go unsupervised or constantly on for on and on and on, because there's just things that are happening that are too dangerous. So the hope is that we are waking up, and our book will help for sure. But I'm with you. I'm a little bit like, what are we gonna do? But we're doing.
It makes you a little crestfallen for
It
sure.
does. It does.
So we don't want to leave you on a Debbie Downer.
We don't, but like if our policymakers and lawmakers and legal representatives are there, their main job is to protect the people. So that's where I feel a little like, where's the protection for our children, our most vulnerable, Like, how is this happening? And I guess maybe they too can't keep up. I don't know. I don't really know what those solutions are, but I do know that we just need to keep talking, and we need to like really share this and make sure it gets out there so that people know the ways and the damage that can happen. This, the traumatic aftermath is no joke for any of these things. And I think that people minimize it because they think, oh, it was just a picture. It was just that or the other. And that's not accurate.
It's the canary in the coal mine, it's like we have to realize this is a message for everybody. And, certainly it makes me sad, having a daughter who's LGBTQ, like thinking about the kids that feel like they can't come out to their parents. It drives them into these, secret places, and secret places a kid goes are never good, are
Mhm.
never good.
No.
So if your child can't come to you, they're going to find some community that welcomes them in with open arms. I mean, and to me, what's shocking, I have to say, even that said, and to illustrate that point, is that on Roblox alone, there's a community of 100,000 people seeking to do malevolent acts to children. One
That's
group.
so scary. That is so
It's
scary.
so scary. It's so massive.
And it becomes a frenzy. And if they're all watching porn and all like this becomes an illness. It's a pandemic, epidemic, the things that you and I say, like it is, there's no end to what it could be. If it's 100,000, what's it going to be next year? Like that's just really scary. So
Be
we're
vigilant. The bottom line is be aware, be vigilant, be willing to open conversations with your kid. And if your kid is struggling with connection, you got to find something. Even if it's something that's like horseback riding, or that might be out of reach for some families, but like there are things. Are you near a
Well, no.
beach?
You play a game with your kids. What I did with my nieces is we built a volcano, we did a puzzle, we played out in the yard. Like they don't watch TV, they're not on their iPads. The one does have a phone that she communicates to friends, and she's allowed to do that. But like the rest of it, we played games, we did puzzles, like we interacted, we laughed, we cooked, we whatever. So that's the thing. It's like good old fashioned, may seem corny, but that's what we need to get back to. I sent the orphanage that I work with, I sent them games, and the sister that runs that said, Shez, that was the best thing. We sit around after dinner and we all play games, even though they were like American games, they figured it out because they're not in America. But she was like, we sit around and we play games. That was so good. That's really what we need. And that's what I think every family needs. Whatever your definition of family is, that's what we all need, is to sit around, really connect. Doesn't have to be outside of the home. It can be some of that with peers, but a lot of it can be at home, get off our own devices. Like we're the worst models for that sometimes because we're on our devices. And I did notice it with my nieces. I was trying really hard not to be on my phone because they were not on their phone. Well, the little one doesn't have one, but like they were not on their phones. So I felt like a jerk if I was ever checking my phone as consistently as I might. So I just put it away. I was like, okay, I'm not going to deal with it, So it's just, I think it is a mindset change in that way that we can really make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening, and join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode of 7 on Sundays.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.